that will benefit consumers and the small businesses that repair and replace home systems covered by home warranties. And, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests for time, so if the gentleman is ready to close.
Likewise here, I'm ready to close. I just want to say in closing that, again, Ms. Bickert has done a wonderful job on this, Mr. Speaker, to be commended for it. This is a very important, simple piece of legislation, but will help iron out and smooth out confusion and allow for our real estate and our housing and our home mortgage industry to move more smoothly. And I urge all of my colleagues to vote for it. With that, I balance my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would encourage all of my colleagues to support this bill as amended, and I would yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from Illinois yields back the balance of her time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2446 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to take from the Speaker's table Bill S-3363 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 3363, an act to provide for the use of National Infantry Museum and Soldier Center commemorative coin surcharges and for other purposes.
Is there objection to the consideration of this bill? Without objection, the bill is read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass Bill H.R. 3187 with an amendment.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3187, a bill to require the Secretary of the Treasury to mint coins in recognition and celebration of the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the March of Dimes Foundation.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Dold, and the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to add extraneous materials on this bill.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 3187, the March of Dimes Commemorative Coin Act. I'm proud to have introduced this bill and to have worked closely with my friend and colleague from New York, Congresswoman Nita Lowey. This legislation authorizes the minting and issue in 2015 of a commemorative coin honoring the 75th anniversary of the March of Dimes and recognizes their landmark accomplishments in maternal and child health. Surcharges on the sales of these special coins will fund critical research and programs to support healthy mothers, healthy infants, and healthy families nationwide. Mr. Speaker, it's summertime across our nation, and back home in our districts, children are playing outside with friends or going swimming at the pool. But more than 75 years ago, children stayed indoors during the summer. Their parents wouldn't let them go to the park or to the pool because of outbreaks of polio. Polio back then could strike any child, and no one knew what the cause was. The March of Dimes is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1938 by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt with a mission to eradicate polio. In FDR's day, polio was an epidemic disease that paralyzed or killed up to 52,000 Americans, mostly children, each and every year. Even the president had polio. So during the Great Depression, citizens sent dimes, 4 billion of them, to the White House to fund polio research. That effort funded the research by doctors Salk and Sabin that produced the vaccines that have eradicated polio in the United States and in much of the world. In the quest for a vaccine, the March of Dimes supported many other important research milestones in newborn and child health. For example, in 1953, Francis Crick and March of Dimes grantee Dr. James Watson identified the double helix structure of DNA, and in 1962 won the Nobel Prize for mapping the human genome. Another research breakthrough, Mr. Speaker, came in 1960 when the March of Dimes supported research that developed the first screening test for PKU, a rare metabolic genetic disorder that caused intellectual disabilities. Since that time, the March of Dimes has led the effort to expand newborn screening. Now, every baby born in the United States receives screening for dozens of conditions that have the potential to cause catastrophic health problems or death if not detected and treated promptly at birth. Today, the March of Dimes is leading the nation's effort to reduce premature birth. Every year, nearly 500,000 infants are born far too soon. In my home state of Illinois, almost 13% of all infants are born prematurely. Preterm birth is the leading cause of death among newborns. Many of those who survive face a lifetime of serious health problems, including cerebral palsy, intellectual disabilities, chronic lung disease, and vision and hearing loss. Preterm delivery can happen to any pregnant woman, and in nearly half of the cases, no one knows why. The March of Dimes National Prematurity Campaign funds a robust portfolio of research and education programs designed to unveil the causes and address the risk factors of preterm birth. For example, the March of Dimes is working with hospitals to implement best practices that discourage early elective deliveries before 39 completed weeks of pregnancy. Thanks to the dedication of the March of Dimes and others, the United States has seen a decline in prematurity rate for 4 consecutive years. Mr. Speaker, the March of Dimes has an extraordinary history of achievement. More than 4 million infants are born every year in the United States, and the March of Dimes helps each and every one through research, education, vaccines, and breakthroughs. The commemorative coin will help fund these vital, important program activities. H.R. 3187 has broad bipartisan support in both chambers of the Congress, with 304 co-sponsors here in the House and 68 in the United States Senate. This legislation complies with all statutory requirements for the commemorative coin program, and the coins will be produced at no cost to the American taxpayer. To claim the surcharges, the March of Dimes will raise matching funds from private sources. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to have sponsored this bipartisan bill, and I'd like to thank the Congressman from New York, Representative Lowy, for her steadfast leadership and hard work to see this day become a reality. I'd also like to thank Chairman Spencer Baucus and Ranking Member Barney Frank for helping to get this bill to the floor here today. I also want to thank my friend from Georgia for him representing time on the other side today and for his leadership as well. And Mr. Speaker, for 75 years, the March of Dimes has dedicated itself to helping all infants get a healthy start, to get a healthy start in life, which is what I think is very, very important. I ask my colleagues to join me in voting for H.R. 3187, the March of Dimes Commemorative Coin Act, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise today to lend my support to this extraordinary and wonderful piece of legislation, an expression of strong bipartisan support. I certainly want to thank my friend Congressman Dole from Illinois for his leadership on this, and it's a pleasure to join with him on the floor today to manage time on this bill. And this bill, H.R. 3187, as was pointed out, the March of Dimes Commemorative Coin Act. For 75 years now, the March of Dimes organization has worked to prevent infant mortality, premature births, and birth defects in our children in the United States and other parts of the world. And I could think of no better time and place to honor this wonderful organization than right here and right now in the halls of Congress. This organization was originally founded by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt to help treat and prevent polio. The March of Dimes would meet with tremendous success, and through their founding of the work of Dr. Jonas Salk, would contribute greatly to curing that disease. Having accomplished their original goal, the March of Dimes would now turn their attention to promoting healthy women, healthy pregnancies, and healthy babies. The March of Dimes Foundation works not only here in the United States, in local communities around the country, but as I mentioned, also around the world, to educate and inform both women and doctors and policymakers on the prevention of birth defects and premature births. This work is so vital, so very important, and really so very precious, Mr. Speaker, as a healthy pregnancy and a healthy birth can mean so much and start the child off on the right foot that will last the rest of their entire life. This bill is simple, Mr. Speaker. It would allow for the minting and the making of a commemorative coin, which basically will be a silver $1 coin for this wonderful organization. These coins would then be sold to the general public, with a portion going to pay off the cost of minting the coin, but the rest going to support the very, very important work of this foundation. So I ask, Mr. Speaker, that my colleagues join me in voting in favor of this bill, and in so doing, we'll be sending a big thank you to the March of Dimes for their hard work and for their dedication over the last 75 years. And, Mr. Speaker, I also mentioned the fact that we also support them each year in our special cooking and preparation for their major fundraisers that many of members of Congress and our families and our wives take part in. What an extraordinary organization doing an extraordinary thing for those who are most precious to us, and that is the children of the United States of America. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr. Speaker, before I yield, I do want to just thank my good friend from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for his leadership and support of the March of Dimes. And he talked a little bit about the recent fundraiser that the March of Dimes held, where members of Congress actually were cooking for this fundraiser. What he failed to mention was, I believe Mr. Scott and Mrs. Scott, for that matter, actually won the cooking contest. And so thank you again. It was one of the few places I know we went back for second, so really appreciate that. Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield to my good friend and gentlewoman from Illinois for 2 minutes.
The gentlelady from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Illinois for yielding and commend him for his hard work on this important bill. And I rise in support of the bill, H.R. 3187, the March of Dimes Commemorative Coin Act of 2011. This legislation recognizes the tremendous achievements of the March of Dimes in protecting the health of infants and mothers across the United States. Founded by President Franklin Roosevelt, as was noted, in 1938, the March of Dimes was instrumental in eradicating polio. The organization then turned its sights on birth defects, premature birth, and infant mortality. For decades, the March of Dimes has been on the forefront of medical research. It educates parents and medical professionals about healthy pregnancies and has helped significantly expand access to neonatal intensive care for premature and sick infants. H.R. 3187 recognizes the accomplishments of this great American success story of goodwill and public service, and it celebrates the 75th anniversary of the March of Dimes through a commemorative coin. I'm pleased to have been an original co-sponsor of this important bill, and I urge my colleagues to join us in paying a fitting tribute to an organization known as the champion of all babies. And with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Speaker, I have no more speakers, so I will just close my remarks. Again, it's a pleasure working with you on this bill, Mr. Doyle. And again, what a noble occasion this is for such a worthy cause. And thank you for mentioning about my wife. So I give all credit to my wife for that cooking she did. I think it was shrimp and grits and let's see, I think, yeah, and gumbo, her mother's gumbo. And I won first prize at that event. Thank you. And it's such a wonderful occasion, and to have all members of Congress who participate with this fundraising every year is just wonderful. So I just urge certainly a unanimous vote on that. And again, it's been a pleasure working with you on this bill.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the exchange of letters between the Committee on Financial Services and the Committee on Ways and Means regarding the bill be included in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, in closing, I just want to again commend my colleagues. This is a bipartisan bill, broad bipartisan support, talking about the Commemorative Coin Act for the March of Dimes, truly a wonderful organization that really helps protect our nearest and dearest and our children. And I just want to thank my colleagues for their leadership and support and urge a quick and swift passage. I yield back.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3187 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 4104 with an amendment.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 4104, a bill to require the Secretary of the Treasury to mint coins in recognition and celebration of the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Renacci, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to add extraneous material on this bill.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to urge approval of H.R. 4104, the Pro Football Hall of Fame Commemorative Coin Act. Since being introduced on February 28, 2012, we have gathered 294 co-sponsors. I would like to give a special thanks to Representative Stivers and Schuler for helping me collect such a large and bipartisan group of co-sponsors. I would also like to thank the Chairman and Ranking Members of the House Financial Services Committee, Representative Baucus and Representative Frank, for their support. The bill before us celebrates the 50th anniversary of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the pride of Canton, Ohio. The hall opened its doors on September 7, 1963. 6 legends were enshrined that day: Sammy Baugh, Red Grange, George Halas, Don Hudson, Bronco Nagurski, and Jim Thorpe. These Titans were the first of the 273 men who are now enshrined in the Hall of Fame. And I must add that 23 of those members are from Ohio. Americans from all walks of life have enjoyed the game of football for decades, and the Pro Football Hall of Fame ensures The achievements of the Gridiron Greatest will be remembered and preserved for generations of future fans. Since its opening almost 50 years ago, the Pro Football Hall of Fame has attracted more than 9 million visitors to Ohio from across the world. Through its media and internet outreach, nearly 15 million more participate in Hall-related activities. The Pro Football Hall of Fame's efforts go beyond preserving the history of the gridiron. Two of the Hall's core missions are educating youth and promoting positive values. A few highlight programs exemplify its missions. Camps for kids, designed to promote good nutrition and physical fitness. The Hall's Black History Month program, which details the African-American experience in professional football. The Hall of Fame Reader, a kindergarten through 12 grade summary literacy program. And teacher workshops for graduate and continual educational studies. These educational programs are designed to strengthen core curriculum knowledge and skills across key learning areas: the arts, geography, health, history, language arts, math, and science. Mr. Speaker, this legislation recognizes and celebrates the accomplishments of our sports heroes, but it also will help support those exceptional philanthropic efforts. Each coin will be sold for an amount that recovers all real and imputed costs plus a surcharge, so there is absolutely no cost to the taxpayer. Once the Hall raises matching funds from the private sector, it may claim the surcharges that will be available to help finance the expansion and renovations of its facilities and carry out its mission. We are now at the goal line and prepared to put this legislation into the end zone. I urge all members to support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the sponsors of this bill. I want to thank the gentleman from Ohio for putting this bill and having this bill on the floor. And indeed, the Pro Football Hall of Fame is the pride of Canton, Ohio. It is also the apple of the eye of all Americans. When we think of the National Football League, we immediately think of the grand names of football history. The gentleman from Ohio named the initial inductees. Initially coming in my mind as individuals such as Jim Brown, or Jerry Rice, or Johnny Unitas, or Joe Montana, Walter Payton. These are household names that are housed now forevermore in the Hall of Fame in the National Football League. But we forget that the National Football League and the Hall of Fame says we're giving back. We're not going to just be involved in keeping the fame and the records of the NFL. We understand that we are an American sport, and so we're going to give back to the American people, especially our young people, our children, who, like I, growing up, idolized many of the players that are now in the Hall of Fame. So what the Hall of Fame does is to make sure that it gets involved in programs that the gentleman of Ohio just talked about, camps for kids, to help them promote nutrition and physical fitness. We often hear in this society that we're talking about people are too obese. Well, the NFL recognizes that. And the NFL Hall of Fame, or Pro Football Hall of Fame, as a result, makes sure there's programs promoting good nutrition, eating good foods, exercise. Particularly, it's been very important to me when I look at the Hall of Fame's Black History Month program, which details the African-American experience. I can recall growing up with my father talking about Marion Motley with the Cleveland Browns at the time, and the history that he played in helping and promoting others. And this gives us all around history about every American. Kindergarten through 12th graders, a literacy program. We talk about the need to make sure that our young people are able to compete. You can't compete if you're not literate. The Pro Football Hall of Fame makes sure that every child that it can touch will also be a reader. We want to be competitive in health and history and language and arts and math and science. Well, Pro Football Hall of Fame has a program that it takes throughout America to help make that happen. And so this Commemorative Coin Act will help them at no cost to the taxpayers run these programs and preserve its facilities so that it can continue to build the legacy of a strong American game, but of also making sure that all of America's children and all of America's people have an opportunity to grow up, to be literate, to be healthy, and to be competitive globally with anyone. So indeed, I urge all of my colleagues to vote aye for the Pro Football Hall of Fame Commemorative Coin Act, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that an exchange of letters between the Committee on Financial Services and the Committee on Ways and Means regarding this bill be included in the congressional record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman from New York for his inspiring comments, and I would agree that the Pro Football Hall of Fame is a great asset not only to the city of Canton, the state of Ohio, and America. And the accomplishments that it provides, other than just enshrining assets, are a great asset to this hall. So at this, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves.
Having no further speakers, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I ask my colleagues to join me in passing H.R. 4104, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4104 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, proceedings will resume on motions to suspend the rules previously postponed.
We're going to clear a series of 11 voice votes. There's just a pause in each of them for the clerk to report the title, but you can go ahead whenever you're ready. The unfinished business? Yep.
The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 3706 as amended, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar Number 435, H.R. 3706, a bill to create the Office of Chief Financial Officer of the Government of the Virgin Islands and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing S. 270, which the clerk will report by title.
Senate 270, an act to direct the Secretary of the Interior to convey certain federal land to Deschutes County, Oregon.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing S-271, which the clerk will report by title.
Senate 271, an act to require the Secretary of Agriculture to enter into a property conveyance with the City of Walla, Oregon, and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 3796 as amended, which the clerk will report by title.
H.R. 3796, a bill to reauthorize certain programs established by the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act of 2006.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
1950.
The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 1950 as amended, which the clerk will report by title.
H.R. 1950, a bill to enact Title 54, United States Code, National Park System as positive law.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
3120.
The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 3120 as amended, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar Number 430, H.R. 3120, a bill to amend the Immigration and Nationality Act to require the accreditation of certain educational institutions for purposes of a non-immigrant student visa and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 6029, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar Number 443, H.R. 6029, a bill to amend Title 18 United States Code to provide for increased penalties for foreign and economic espionage and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 6063, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar Number 459, H.R. 6063, a bill to amend Title 18 United States Code with respect to child pornography and child exploitation offenses.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 4362, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar Number 460, H.R. 4362, a bill to provide effective criminal prosecutions for certain identity thefts and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 6062, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar Number 457, H.R. 6062, a bill to reauthorize the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program through fiscal year 2017.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 1550 as amended, which the clerk will report by title.
H.R. 1550, a bill to establish programs in the Department of Justice and in the Department of Homeland Security to help states that have high rates of homicide and other violent crime and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the title is amended.
Everyone's records reflect that we're all clear. Okay. All right, Brian, you and I have no 1 minute. I have no. First tap there, Mr. Brock.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Edwards, is recognized for 35 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.
Now, they say that he who pays the piper plays the tune. But unfortunately, in today's campaign finance system, it's just like one Johnny One note, and it's about millionaires and billionaires. I rise today, Mr. Speaker, to speak on an important issue. The fact is that our democracy is for sale to the highest bidder. Super PACs, millionaires and billionaires are taking over our election. And they're doing what ordinary individuals don't have any capacity to do. And the impact on policymaking and on elections is debilitating. And it makes voiceless the very people, Mr. Speaker, who most need a voice in these very troubling times. Our seniors, young people, poor people, working people, women, middle-income families, small business owners, all of them have just been shut down because of this system. But it's worse now than it was even in the dark days of Watergate. Now, before coming to Congress, Mr. Speaker, I spent nearly 15 years of my career actually working on issues related to campaign finance reform, election law, voting rights, and government ethics. From my time as a lawyer to my service as executive director of several nonprofit organizations. And I just can't think of a worse time than this time that we're living in now. The complexity of balancing important constitutional considerations is really important, but with appropriate public policy is also important. And we're just not striking that balance. In fact, Mr. Speaker, if you think about it, in the days following Watergate and the reforms that came thereafter, much of the way that we thought about our campaign finance system, that we thought about the role of money in politics and its relation to policymaking, was almost completely circumscribed by pretty much one decision and a couple of others, the Buckley v. Vallejo decision and all the cases that followed. During that time, we could not have imagined a more desolate campaign finance landscape, in fact, than the one that we have today, Mr. Speaker. Here we are facing the Supreme Court's 2010 decision in Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. Now, you would think that a lot of people would not really be familiar with any one Supreme Court decision, but in fact, all across this country, people are outraged by that decision because it has been devastating to the political system. Now, Mr. Speaker, my congressional district is in the metropolitan Washington area, in the Maryland suburbs, and so we get the benefit in this area of hearing advertising that comes on television from Virginia. Now, Virginia was a battleground state in the presidential elections, and so that means that we get to experience in Maryland where we wouldn't ordinarily all of the election advertising. And what we see is ad after ad, and you can't even read the small print on the ad. You don't know who's paying for it. You don't know where it's coming from. You don't know what's behind it, because none of that's disclosed. And you hear hammering one candidate or hammering another candidate. And so here you sit as an ordinary person at home just wanting to get up and take care of your family and make sure that your kids are okay. And this political system has gone amok and awash in campaign dollars, money coming from all sorts of sources. But what Citizens United did was it upended the role of the people in the process, took away our voice in the face of unlimited, undisclosed sources of money that did not in the past have a place in the campaign finance mix. Well, Mr. Speaker, I think this can't continue. We can't allow it to go unchecked. It's just been too debilitating to people at home. It's having an impact. It has an impact all across the board on participation, on whether people feel that they have a voice in policy making, on the candidates who choose to run for elective office or not. And I can understand why the American people feel like, you know what, I just want to shut down because the system simply isn't working for me. And so here we are, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to have this opportunity to say a few words this evening because we're 97 calendar days away from the November 2012 election. But we're 16 legislative days away, and that means that Congress, every elected member of the House and the Senate, have 16 legislative days, 16 days of opportunity to restore sanity to the campaign finance system, to let the people know that we actually care about whether their voice is important versus the voices of the millionaires and the billionaires who get to set the agenda. 16 days. There's a lot that you can do in 16 days, or you can do nothing. And that's the choice that we have today. So there can't be any doubt that, in fact, we've entered a really unprecedented era in our political system, where super PACs rule. I didn't even know what a super PAC was. Most Americans probably didn't, but we sure know now. Where one person, one vote has been more appropriate for a history lesson than a description of the electoral process. And how did we get to this framework that allows a free rein to outside organizations, to corporations and their treasuries, to the wealthy, allowing them to raise unlimited amounts of cash to influence American election? The question really is that we got here because of Citizens United. So 2 years ago, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 ruling, said, you know what, we're going to invalidate everything we've known about the campaign finance system. The Federal Election Campaign Act, which has been rendered pretty much useless. The bipartisan, and I'll repeat that, bipartisan, Mr. Speaker, Campaign Reform Act, that was a way that Republicans and Democrats came together for things like disclosure and limiting contributions and circumscribing the role of money in politics. And in a 5-4 decision, the United States Supreme Court threw it all out. And in doing so, what the court did was it struck down long-time prohibitions against corporate use of general treasury funds for independent expenditures and for communicating in elections. Now, what the American people need to understand, Mr. Speaker, is that means that no matter what corporation you are, maybe you represent insurance companies or the financial sector or the energy sector or any number of sectors that certainly hire a lot of employees and they have shareholders. But what they've said is, the Supreme Court said is, we're going to reach into the corporate piggy bank and we're going to allow corporations for the first time ever really in our modern day politics to spend their money directly on campaigns. Now, Mr. Speaker, corporations have name, brand identity, and so they don't do this willy-nilly. So what do? They pass it through an organization that's a shadow organization, and so we don't know where that money is coming in directly until after the fact. Maybe we see 3-point type on a television screen that flashes right by, Mr. Speaker, but the fact is the American public doesn't know. Now, there had been long-settled cases in this country that said that corporations actually didn't have the ability to spend out of their corporate treasuries when corporations are formed for all kinds of reasons, but not really to spend out of their treasuries like people, real people, can and should in the political process. But Citizens United changed all of that. Then came another case, and now keep in mind, this is just in the last 2 years that our system has been completely upended. Then came another case called Speech Now versus ORG versus the Federal Election Commission. And what the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia decided was that contributions to political action committees that only make supposed independent expenditures can't be limited. That's right, unlimited contributions from political action committees. These have come to be known as super PACs. And why are they so super? Because it's unlimited money, and it's just gushing into the political system. In states all across the country that are the favored battleground states, people in those states, in states like North Carolina and Virginia and Ohio and other states can actually see that money firsthand because it's just being spent like crazy. And you know what? With 97 days, Mr. Speaker, left until the election, there will be more. In fact, I think that the American people will be so sick and tired of the advertising and not knowing who's behind it and the cross-messaging and things that may or may not be true, but you have no way of checking it. The American people are going to be so sick and so outraged that they will continue to demand, as they have been, that we return some sanity to the system. These court decisions, of course, have said that corporations have equal rights to those of an individual. Can you imagine that your local corporation that does a great job of hiring people in your community is on par with an individual when it comes to making a political contribution? But that is, in effect, the land that we live in right now. The result has been a stunning influx of money that threatens to erode our democratic process and leads us to even lower voter participation rates. The danger of Citizens United and the cases that followed was actually heralded by Justice Stevens in his dissenting opinion in the case. And he couldn't have been more prescient. Here's what he said. He warned that it would, quote, undermine the integrity of elected institutions around the nation. Well, you don't have to look very far, Mr. Speaker, to know that the American people understand and believe that our institution is about as low as you can go. I mean, all of us have seen the numbers. And it can't be separated. The way that the American people feel about our elected officials, feel about our elected institutions, feel about the ability of our institutions to respond to their everyday needs. We must know that that is deeply connected to the role, the perverse role of money in politics. I don't have to tell the American people, Mr. Speaker, you don't have to tell the American people because they know. They know in their gut that it's actually wrong for corporations to reach in their treasuries and spend on campaigns. They know in their gut that it's wrong for a handful of millionaires and billionaires to control the agenda, to control the policy, to control the message. They know it's wrong. Now, Justice Kennedy, in his majority opinion, and remember the majority won in Citizens United, stated that, quote, independent expenditures simply do not give rise to corruption or the appearance of corruption. Clearly, the justice has not really participated in politics because you don't have to look very far to know that, in fact, the corruption is actually rampant. Now, there is the appearance of corruption, maybe not outright. Nobody's buying or selling a vote. That's not the point. But the point is that it appears to be just really dirty. Most people look at our politics, they look at the nastiness, and you know what, Mr. Speaker, they just want to wash their hands. Now, it's possible that this flow of super PACs into elections would allow for independent expenditures, but the fact is there's nothing independent about it. It's not independent when a family member starts a super PAC. It's not independent when a former business partner starts a super PAC. It's not independent when former colleagues and co-workers start a super PAC and then begin spending on elections, not very far from the candidate. And the American people understand this. Now, we can try to pretend that it's something different, but it's nothing different. The operations of these super PACs provide a stark contrast to the flawed assumptions that the court made in its ruling. It's up to us in the Congress in 16 legislative days, 97 days before this important election, to change that dynamic. To say that for the future, that for going forward, we understand that there is no role for this kind of money in our politics. There's no role for it in our elections. And so, although these organizations have been supposedly declared independent by the courts, the reality is that they flout the coordination rules that have set up that supposedly would keep them independent. Staffers, family, friends of a particular candidate that the super PAC is supporting. No great secret. In fact, coming out of the Republican primary elections, it was no secret at all who the millionaires and the billionaires were putting their money behind. And so while the official campaign and the candidate are allowed to keep their hands clean, and I use that term loosely, clean, these shadow arms of a campaign are used to launch unrelenting attacks against an opponent that they pretend or that are unaffiliated or with a particular candidate or an election strategy. It's almost laughable. And in fact, I think people at home, when they're not tuning out, in fact, they're laughing at us. Justice Stevens' warning materialized initially in the 2010 election. I know that I recall that because for the first time in our history, corporate and wealthy individuals really began to flood the airwaves. And here we are in 2012, and in that 2-year interim, boy, have they figured out this system, Mr. Speaker, and it's all over the place, flooding the entire electoral process. In the 2010 election cycle, the spending by corporations and outside groups actually multiplied fourfold from the 2006 election, going to nearly $300 million, astonishing at that time. But you know what? You haven't seen anything yet. Let's take a look at where we are today. From 2008 to 2010, the average amount spent for a House seat, that is for a winning candidate, increased 32%, from about $2 million to over $2.7 million. But as we know, the worst really was yet to come. At the start of the 2012 Republican presidential primaries, we really began to see the creep and the crawl and the impact and the danger of Citizens United. And the results, as I said, were on full display in Iowa. Super PACs there actually outspent candidates 2-to-1. That's right, the so-called independent expenditure groups outspent the actual candidates. The super PACs had a bigger voice than the actual candidates for the Republican primary. Republican presidential hopeful and former Speaker of this House, Newt Gingrich, who at the time actually supported the Supreme Court's decision, what did he see? He saw his poll numbers plummet after a barrage attack of about $4 million in negative advertising that was paid for Restore Our Future, a super PAC supporting former Governor Mitt Romney and run by his former staffers. The same group then poured nearly $8 million into the Florida primary, with Winning Our Future, a super PAC supporting former Speaker Gingrich, spending a $6 million ad buy. Let's look at the numbers. And I'm sure the American public, Mr. Speaker, must be saying, I can't believe they spend that much money on politics, but surely they do. And after being targeted by Restore Our Future, former Speaker Gingrich, who, keep in mind, said that he had supported Citizens United, concluded, quote, I think, referring to the anonymous ads, that it debilitates politics. He said, "I think it strengthens millionaires and it weakens middle-class candidates." I couldn't agree with him more. I could not agree with him more. Mr. Speaker, the landscape has continued to darken as we march toward the general election. Groups are collecting and planning to spend enormous sums of money. American Crossroads and Priorities USA reportedly plan to raise and spend $240 million and $100 million, respectively, on the election. Just recently, National Public Radio reported that Republican super PACs and other outside groups, including Karl Rove, the Koch brothers, and Tom Donahue of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, supposedly independent, plan to spend combined $1 billion before Election Day. That's right. The American people need to understand that. $1 billion. Unless we think that this is just about Republicans, Democrats are trying to play too. It doesn't matter who's playing. It's wrong. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, as of August 1st, that's today, 705 groups have organized as super PACs and have reported receipts of over $318 million and independent expenditures already of more than $167 million in the 2012 election cycle. That's as of today. And here we are. They've got 97 more days to raise more money, to spend more money, and to do all of that undercover. I want to put it into stark contrast because just a couple of weeks ago, just 2 weeks ago, the number stood at 678. Today it's 705. Who knows what it will be next week? With receipts of $281 million, but now those receipts are $318 million. Now, can you do a little math and a multiplier? Because this thing is like rapid fire all across the country in this election cycle. The growth is really out of control. Citizens United will continue to allow super PACs to permeate the airwaves with distortions, with half-truths, and all of that in an attempt to alter the political discourse. This is not about what candidates are saying individually, because it's hard to even hear directly from them because we're hearing so much from super PACs. Now, I can recall that many years ago when I began working on issues of campaign finance reform, Mr. Speaker, it was the Republicans who said, you know what, we don't want all that other regulation, but we love disclosure. It turns out that now in the day when the majority opinion in Citizens United declared that the one thing that wasn't off limits is actually disclosure, and so Democrats put forward a disclosure bill called Disclose, introduced by my colleague from Maryland, Chris Van Hollen. Many of us have signed on to it. That disclosure bill was brought up in the Senate. It's been brought up over here in the House, and you know what? It's gone nowhere. And so the same people who said over the last 20 years or more, even since Buckley v. Vallejo, certainly more, have said we support disclosure. We are robust supporters of disclosure, but not today. Not today, Mr. Speaker, not today. They don't want to disclose anyone, any individual, any corporation that's behind these contributions. And why is that? It's about politics, Mr. Speaker. It's because maybe it's working in the favor of those who don't want disclosure, who don't want their names out there, who don't want the American public, whether it's in my district or any other district, to know who they are and to know what's being spent. Now, of course, I envision that, like many members of Congress, you could run the risk as a member of Congress, to be sure, to speak out against this, nasty, dirty, unlimited money in our politics and run the risk that they'll all gang up on you. I'm going to take that risk, Mr. Speaker, because I happen to believe that the American people are sick and tired of it. They want us to do something about it. It's important for us to speak out about that, because otherwise we lose everything. We lose participation. We lose people, wanting to be involved and engaged in politics, wanting to run for elective office, and those who pay the piper just get to carry off in the process. We can't allow that to happen. And so I believe in disclosure, but I don't think we can end that disclosure. I think we have to go a step farther. We want to promote that kind of transparency, though, in the political process. We want to enhance public reporting by corporations and unions and all outside groups. I'm happy to let anybody know who's funding my elections. All of us should be pleased to do that because we know that it contributes to public confidence in us as elected officials. I want to stand by any ad and say, I approve this message. Well, a corporation should stand by and say that they approve that message, too. I want to know who's behind those ads. And so I think we still have 16 legislative days left in this Congress. Bring disclose to the floor. It's time to do the right thing. Now, I don't control the agenda on the floor, Mr. Speaker. The Republican majority does. And so they do have the capacity to bring reforms to this floor before we do anything else. Now, I also think, you know, this campaign finance problem requires some other things, too, and it's why I've supported the Fair Elections Now Act. It's in the Senate, it's S-750, and here in the House, it's H.R. 1404. It's modeled after successful programs in the states. Now, there are some people who believe the states are the laboratories for democracy. I share that belief. Well, the states have experimented with ways in which you could fund campaigns to encourage different and more diverse people to run for elective office, that you could clean the dirty money out of the system so that we're not governed by making phone calls to ask people for money and to fund our campaigns. I think that Fair Elections Now actually does that, and it's why I've supported it. And what would happen is we'd create a voluntary program where congressional candidates could actually qualify for funding to run for competitive elections and campaigns. In exchange, those participating candidates, what I would do, Mr. Speaker, as a candidate, is agree to strict campaign limits and forego all private fundraising. And to the American public, Mr. Speaker, what I would say is, if you don't own your elections, then who does? And right now, we know that we don't own our elections, Mr. Speaker. We need that kind of reform. And so I believe those interim reforms are really necessary. But as an attorney and as somebody who has spent decades working on campaign finance, I think that we have to go farther. I think that what the court says is, Congress, you don't have any authority to regulate except by doing disclosure. And so to me, Mr. Speaker, what that means is that it requires serious consideration of an amendment to the Constitution. And I don't take that lightly. In fact, as an advocate and a donor long before I came to Congress, I spent the better part of my career shunning attempts by reform groups who would come to me and who wanted me to work on reforms that required us to amend the Constitution, and I always said no. And the reason is because I think that amending the Constitution is a serious step, requires serious consideration. But here, the Supreme Court really hasn't left us any choice. And in fact, in a couple of cases from Citizens United, they inasmuch have said so. They said pretty directly, Congress, you don't have the authority to regulate campaigns except to the extent that you do disclosure. And so I've made a proposal to amend the Constitution. I worked with Lawrence Tribe, noted constitutional professor, worked with colleagues here in the Congress, including then House Chairman of the Judiciary, John Conyers, in the last Congress, reintroduced that amendment in this Congress because I think that the time is now. And I've always questioned the rationale for the Court's decision, but I've done a reality check because writing this decision requires us to start in the halls of this Congress, requires us to continue on to the states with a constitutional amendment. And so I've introduced this amendment, and I know that since then there have been a number of other constitutional amendments introduced. Just last week I testified over in the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, where there's consideration of constitutional amendment in the Senate. Now is the time. The other thing that we could do in these legislative days, in addition to bringing the Disclose Act to this floor, is to convene serious hearings among serious people about amending the Constitution so that we can restore sanity to our system and to make sure that our citizens' voices count more than those voices that are just digging into corporate treasuries. And so I don't think there's even one way to do this, but I think it's important to put something on the table. And so I urge consideration by this House of House Joint Resolution 78, which is an amendment to the Constitution that goes at the very limited track of saying that Congress indeed has the authority that it needs under our Constitution to make the changes that we need to the campaign finance system to make sure that elections are owned by the American people. Really simple thing to do, and let's take it to the legislatures. Now, because so many of my colleagues have introduced constitutional amendments also, many of us have actually joined with people all across this country, in fact, millions of people across this country who are calling for us to be on the side of democracy. And we've signed on to a declaration for democracy. I'm a proud declarant for democracy. And so we have 275 cities and towns from New York to Boulder to Los Angeles all across the country, big cities, small cities, who've called on a declaration for democracy, passed Citizens United, anti-Citizens United resolutions. And we might differ on the subtleties of what this resolution would be, but that's the job of the United States Congress, to hear it out, to hear all sides, to hear from constitutional scholars about how we need to do this, but to do this together for the American people. Over 1,854 public officials across the country, including 92 members of the House, 28 senators, and over 2,000 business leaders across the country have said it's time for us to take a stand for democracy. They've signed this name to our Declaration for Democracy. I would encourage all of our colleagues, before you leave town, sign your name to the Declaration for Democracy. Show the American people that we stand on their side. And so there's no doubt that it's a bold step to amend a document that's only been amended 27 times. And some have questioned the need to fix the problem with the constitutional amendment. But the Supreme Court pretty much answered that question unequivocally. The Supreme Court has also said, you know what? If Congress wants to do something, then Congress has to act in this way. And so I don't question that the Supreme Court made this decision. I accept that. It was a 5-4 ruling. That's the way our system works. But the other part of our system is that free-thinking members of the United States House of Representatives and of the Senate come together to do what's right for the American people. So, Mr. Speaker, here's what I would say in closing. Millionaires and billionaires are really doing simply what ordinary citizens can't do anymore. And you know, they've got all the strings. And I can understand that there are, Mr. Speaker, are people at home who just really aren't sure where they fit in this system. They're not sure what it means for their elected officials to be responsive to them because they believe that there's somebody out there who has more money and as a result more power and as a result more influence than they do at home. And I've traveled all across this country, and I have to tell you, it doesn't matter whether you're in Maine or Montana or you're all the way down through the south of this country, and all across this great landscape where people really want to feel that they have some power, that they have some influence. And, Mr. Speaker, they just don't have that right now. And, you know, when I think about who has the power, Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to close here because our democracy, I just don't even know another way to say that there's a for sale sign on the doors. And I see poor old Uncle Sam here. He's looking mighty sad, Mr. Speaker. I've never seen a more sad-looking Uncle Sam. And part of the reason is because he's shackled. He's shackled by $100 million from Priorities USA action. Uncle Sam is shackled by $300 million from Karl Rove and American Crossroads. Uncle Sam is shackled by $61 million from only 26 billionaires. Uncle Sam is shackled by $39 million from who knows who else. And poor Uncle Sam, sad with his hand out, shackled by $400 million from the Koch brothers, shackled by $100 million from Sheldon Adelson. And we could put a lot more up there, Mr. Speaker, but it's time for the United States Congress to remove the shackles of the money from Uncle Sam so that we don't continue to sell our democracy. It's time for us to remove the shackles. It's time for us to say to the millionaires and billionaires, you got to play just like the person who gives $5 or $1. I mean, not a lot of people give money to political campaigns. I can certainly understand that. So, Mr. Speaker, I would close by urging us to use the 16 legislative days that are left to restore democracy, to restore sanity, by acting for the American people to restore the campaign finance system. And with that, I yield.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Mrs. Bachmann, is recognized for 35 minutes as the designated